Kate Fry here, and another video. And as usual, my co-host Molly is right next to me, but she's a little camera shy at the moment. Okay, I have a slight summer cold, so please bear with me here. Okay, so this is on Caitlin Johnstone. Caitlin Johnstone is an Australian leftist writer. I think she's a great writer. She has amazing insight. She has written about Russiagate, the Russiagate narrative, deconstructing it from the left, the corruption of the Democratic Party, U.S. imperialism, narrative control, and things like that. Amazing writer. I really like her. She's been the center of a huge controversy, which I'll get to. She came on the scene around 2017 or so, relatively new, a new voice. I think she has a lot to offer. Okay, so recent stuff. Recent articles. She's written stuff about two articles about UFOs. Now, a sample of her work. Now, very recently, the media has been upsurge media taking UFO phenomena seriously. Like previously, it's been known about for decades, really since for the last 70 years. Like Air Force test pilots or regular pilots would see weird anomaly. This has been known about for years, but and it's been widely mocked. Someone says they believe in UFOs and widely attacked. Well, in the last couple, really very recently, last few months or so, and have started in 2019, but accelerating, the media is now taking this seriously. They're in one of Caitlin's articles. She has like post after post from Twitter or whatever that serious mainstream journalists are openly talking about. Yeah, I'm a UFO enthusiast. Yeah, I think there's something there. Article after article. Well, like a few months ago, somebody believing in UFOs would have been mocked. Now, Caitlin says the interesting thing for her is not whether or not they exist. Like, that's not really she seems to doubt it. Not whether they exist, whether they're aliens or what. The interesting thing isn't what they are, whether they're aliens or whatever they are. And there's an interesting British debunker, figure his name offhand, but he does a good job of debunking UFO sightings. What she's saying, the interesting thing is the media control, the control of the media. Essentially, all these journalists, all these outlets are now taking it seriously when they would have previously mocked it. They're taking this phenomenon seriously because the military said they could, which is kind of weird when you think about it. The U.S. military is the most corrupt, dishonest, brutal institution in U.S. society, or one of them anyway. And the media is that poses themselves like speaking truth to power or holding powerful people accountable. They're not, and nothing like that. They're sycophants. They're State Department, CIA secretaries, stenographers, basically. So that's the interesting part of this narrative. And Caitlin says, one widely held idea why all of a sudden the media is doing this is fear, whipping up fear. It's somebody has these someone we don't know who has these very powerful forces, very but someone has this very powerful technology that's far beyond anything we have. Could be the Russians, the Chinese, or aliens, whatever it is. The response is based on fear. The military industrial complex is really good at whipping up fear. We're going to have to spend a lot more money. Like when this phenomenon was first taken seriously, like around 2019, that was when Trump had his Space Force. So Caitlin says it's certain to be a psyops, some kind of coordinated psyops. It like the Russiagate narrative was a psyops. There's Russia, the idea that Russia was responsible for getting Putin elected, for getting Trump elected, is nonsense. It's been deconstructed by a fair number of leftist writers. And so it's a psyops. And also, she goes on to say that another interesting thing about this UFO narrative, or taking it more seriously, is it this widespread public apathy? Most people actually don't care. Seriously, people aren't sharing articles about UFOs. You would think that they would, some really big bombshells, but there's not a lot of public interest in it. And she brings that to, again, narrative control. She thinks the media has American people are very much indoctrinated to think in terms of teams, like team red, team blue. And the media narrative spin these things, tighten it, defending one narrative or another. Political narratives, like something by Marjorie Taylor Greene, the right wing lunatic congressperson from Georgia. I mean, she's bizarre. But there's an article about her. People will share it like wildfire. It'll go viral. But or something, appealing to Trump supporters. It'll go with that crowd. It'll go viral. It'll fit one team red or team blue. But something like Syria, like the civil war in Syria or the U.S. role in it, no one will share it. It goes out of the narrative. People don't know what to make of it. The same with this UFO phenomena. It's not quite, it's possibly a scare tactic of the military industrial complex, but there's apathy because it doesn't really fit the red team, blue team partisan narrative. So Caitlin talks about that from the left. Now, this connects to some of her later ideas. This connects to some of the controversy. Okay, back in 2017, shortly after she became known, she barely has a background where she writes about. She has written about Australian issues, Indigenous rights, so things like that in Australia. But around 2017, she started concentrating on U.S. politics. There's a firm she worked for. She got an offer to write a few articles on some firm which apparently went out of business, but it was wild. It was wildly successful writing, and she took off on her own. She writes for Medium and then her own blog, and she's developed a following. Although widespread people, a lot of people on the left don't like her or trust her. In 2017, she had an article. Uh, Lefties need to stop being shy about working with the anti-establishment right. And in this article, it's kind of interesting. She basically talked about environmental destruction, climate change, and there's no one's going to stop it. The sorry state of the left, the route of the left in the U.S. is totally co-opted by the Democratic Party. They're not going to do shit, and Biden is not going to do anything about climate change. So the left is neutered and ineffective. She talks about deep state. The deep state has been a term. It was developed within the left. It was used by right wingers during the Trump administration, by the Trump people, but the concept was developed by the left in the 1970s in relation to Turkey and later Greece. Turkey, for a time, had a lot of coups and constant turmoil, but the deep state refers to the people who are really running things. And same thing could be said of Greece. They had a sort of left social democratic government for a time, but the people who are really running things. And of course, any modern industrial society, a modern industrial state, as they say, they've elected leaders come and go, but the civil servants and the people who really run things are constant. And in the U.S. Case, the deep state, I think there very much is a deep state, or liberals mock that concept. There very much is a deep state, the military-industrial complex, the security state apparatus. Like, does anyone really think that Biden is actually running things? He was at the G7 summit in Cornwall, England. Apparently, he didn't know where he was. He was walking to a cafe. He was rambling around. He didn't know where he was. His wife had to come and get him, and then the crowd there laughed at me. Does anyone really think Biden is running anything? So anyway, Caitlin was talking about this, and she said the right wing, or the populist right wing, is where the energy was. And she suggested in certain situations, a leftist could work with someone on the right. Okay. And she later clarified that in another article, same article rewritten a little bit later, where she emphasized she it's unacceptable working with a Nazi, anyone proposing an ethno state, a fascist, that's completely unacceptable. In fact, she mentioned in both versions of her article that Richard Spencer has sent her like a friend request or followed her on Twitter, and she blocked him. Said, no, I don't want to have anything to do with someone like he is an open racist. I don't have anything to do with Richard Spencer. But she mentioned this guy, Mike Cernovich, who apparently is a noxious character. I didn't know a lot about him, but he was involved with what's called men's rights movement, MRA, men's rights activist, and a pickup artist. He was kind of not really an incel, but part of the incel philosophy, that type of misogynist mentality. Some of his remarks are pretty rapey. And later, Caitlin said, this guy is a fairly disgusting individual. But at the time, she mentioned him at random because Mike Cernovich shared an article that she wrote, anti-war article, and it looked like Cernovich was somewhat he was a right-winger, but he was opposed to war. And so Caitlin was maybe in certain situations, the right wing could work with someone like that in certain specific situations. To be clear, Caitlin has never worked with Mike Senator. She's had nothing to do with him. She's really had not. No, and later, a little while later, she says, I regret saying this. I made a mistake. I was really new at doing this. I made a mistake. I regret saying anything about this. Okay, so anyway, shortly after she wrote that article, there's a firestorm of criticism from the left, specifically Counterpunch, or the editorial staff at Counterpunch. Now, Counterpunch is a long-term leftist institution. They've been around, I think, from the early '90s. They offer a newsletter, mostly associated with editors the late Alexander Cockburn and Jeffrey Sinclair. Okay, so there are a series of articles really slamming her. The first one, I'm written down here. The first one was said it was about the Green Party. It was essentially the first two articles slamming Caitlin were essentially concern trolling the Green Party. So the first article slamming Caitlin Johnstone was in Counterpunch. It was called "The Green Party Marks in a Media Conja" by Yoav Litvin. Okay, well, basically, the article was kind of concern showing for the Green Party. It was upset that David Cobb, who was the campaign manager for Jill Stein when she ran for president in 2016, quoted or relied on Caitlin Johnstone for something. I'm not really sure what. And the article really slammed him and Caitlin. Basically, it distorted what she was saying. It said she's advocating collaborating with Nazis. It was poorly written article, but really slammed her. It Yoav Litvin, he talked about he was outranking her. Basically said, why couldn't David Cobb have relied on a leftist writer with decades of experience? Who is this Caitlin Johnstone? She's from Australia. She's really new. She's has had only a few months of experience doing this. Why, he was really bashing her. She hasn't had any journalistic experience. Who is she? And he was going on and on like this in kind of a very nasty kind of way. Interestingly, at the bottom of the article, he gave his qualifications. He says that Yoav Litvin is a PhD in the behavioral neuroscience. So he made it clear he wanted everyone to know he was a doctor with a PhD, and he's slamming this really young new journalist with lack of experience. He wanted everyone to know that. Okay, so he goes on. He distorts what Caitlin was saying. She's advocating working with Nazis and stuff, and he talks about her deep state theory. Well, she has a conspiracy deep state theory, a simplistic version of it. There are these. He gives a nod to it was developed by the left, but she has these simplistic right wing theories. Now I think he totally distorted what she was saying, and you can read the article and read her rebuttals. He distorted it. And a little while later, there was next thing was also really concern trolling for the Green Party, by an article by Joshua Frank, and it was said on Caitlin Johnstone and David Cobb's attempt to destroy the Green Party. It's like David Cobb was a long-term Green Party activist, and Caitlin Johnstone were trying to destroy the American Green Party. Okay, well, I don't really see how he got that. David Cobb, by the way, he ran for president, I believe it was 2004 in the Green Party. I'm not a huge David Cobb fan. He's dedicated to the Green Party. He's kind of on the right wing of it. Like when he ran, he wanted to do like a safe state strategy. Unsafe states, he wouldn't run against a Democratic party candidate. So I'm not a huge fan of the guy, but he was Jill Stein's campaign manager. I actually worked the Jill Stein campaign myself, both paid and unpaid, and I had fun doing it. My politics are kind of to the left of Jill Stein. I like Azuma Baraka much better, her vice presidential running mate. I think he's one of the best things of the Green Party, and the Green Party is a mess, yes, but I supported Jill Stein running in 2016. So anyway, this article by Joshua Frank kind of did the same thing. It also subtly Russiagated her. It really made fun of the Russiagate. This was Russiagate theory, or it initially made fun of it, but then it went on and said that Caitlin Johnstone is echoing Kremlin talking points. This was in Counterpunch magazine, which is a left-wing magazine, venerable left-wing magazine. Caitlin Johnstone is repeating Kremlin talking points. Ooh. And well, I said, I talk about Seth Rich. Caitlin Johnstone said she thought Seth Rich was probably murdered for giving information to WikiLeaks. I agree with her. I think it's true. But went on. Well, Caitlin Johnstone pushes the debunked the disgusting and debunked Seth Rich conspiracy theories. That went on for a while. Both really terrible articles, not very good. Now, there were a few other articles later in that vein, the same type of thing. Eric Draitser had an article kind of along the same vein. They were accusing Caitlin of being a Nazi sympathizer, advocating the left join with the far right, which was not what she was doing. She defended herself in later articles. As a debate went on. She again made clear that no, I don't, absolutely not working with Nazis, racist, white supremacists, absolutely not, no way. Said there were certain, what she meant to say, and she picked this Mike Cernovich guy, a random actually. Later said that maybe Ron Paul would have been a better example. For a time, there's a pile-on against Caitlin from other parts of the left, which got their cues from Counterpunch. There's also a liberal journal, the Daily Banter, who had really a couple of hit pieces, smear pieces on her. They're not leftist by any means. They were from a liberal perspective. They attacked Caitlin for disputing Russian interference in our election. Well, of course, the Russiagate thing was a crock. Any leftist worth their salt realizes that. So she was disputing the Russiagate narrative. That's not the way they put it. Disputing Russian interference in her election, Seth Rich thing, again, a variety of other things. And they accused her of being working for the Russians, being a Russian agent, by being paid for Putin. They accused her, and she threatened to sue them. And I think she had a good grounds. She threatened to sue them. And I don't know how, there was some drama going on. I don't know the whole thing, but they backed down. They said, wrote in one article, no, she's like Jeremy Fassler, I think. No, she's no evidence she was working for the Russians, but all this other bad stuff about her. So she was smeared, and it kind of ruined her reputation among parts of the left. Okay, so now, I think she was probably wrong about advocating working with Mike Cernovich. She was wrong. It's not something I would agree with. There's a right way and a wrong way to orient towards the left and to work with the left. To be clear, I and Caitlin would think it's totally okay for a principled leftist to work with a libertarian, to work with a traditional conservative. I think like libertarians, I'm not a libertarian. Like libertarian ideology is ultimately bankrupt and has some really big, serious flaws. I'm not by any means a libertarian. Ultimately, bankrupt ideology, but honest libertarians generally share an interest in personal freedom, fear of government surveillance, state surveillance. They're against the security state, generally anti-war. So yeah, and I think it's totally okay to work with a principled libertarian and some traditional conservatives within limits. There's like united front work. You can work with people who don't fully share your politics on certain specific issues, hopefully work to pull them into better politics as well. So anyway, so there's a right way and a wrong way to orient towards the right. Very briefly, an example from revolutionary history. There's a guy named Karl Radek who was a Polish socialist. And he went to Germany, like, I don't know, early 1900s. He was a journalist for the German SPD, the German Socialist Party, and he was on the far left wing. He was a sometime ally of Rosa Luxemburg, although they had a problematical relationship. Anyway, during the Russian Revolution, he went to Russia. He joined the Bolsheviks and was part of the Bolshevik Revolution. Then afterwards, they sent him back to Germany as like the unofficial Soviet ambassador to Germany, and he was their connection with the German left wing. There was a revolutionary process in Germany which played out for some 1919 to 1923. Unfortunately, it failed, but anyway, they sent Karl Radek to Germany. He was arrested. He was in jail for, 9 months. I don't know how long, but he talked with the right wing, with the German right wing. He met right wings, like traditional German conservatives, monarchists, and German industrialists, not the populist right, admittedly, but he talked with the right wing. And some people describe him as kind of a national Bolshevik. The idea was that Germany was a defeated country, and Germany was now an oppressed country, and they could find, as a state, they could find common ground with the Soviet Union, with the left, some alliance with the Soviet Union. And I think he was correct. what he was saying, not what he was saying. His approach was correct. He was bringing people, his conservatives, away from their natural constituency and help trying to orient them towards like the Soviet Union, towards the left. And I think he might have been partially successful. Like in 1924, Weimar Germany had signed the, I think it was the Treaty of Rapallo, treaty with like a treaty with Russia, when the German army could train in Russia and return. They would sell the Russians military aid. It's debatable, but anyway. Later on, there's an incorrect way of orienting towards the right wing. The German Communist Party, the KPD, led by Ruth Fischer, for a time they shared a common platform with the Nazis. They used Nazi-like rhetoric, anti-Semitic rhetoric, which was a mistake. That's the wrong way to orient toward, opportunist way to orient towards the right. Completely wrong way to do it. But anyway, so I'm not an expert on strategy here, but there's a right way and a wrong way to orient towards the right wing. So yes, some people could debate. I work with Mike Cernovich. There's definitely some lines, but I think Caitlin was sincere. She wasn't as insidious, or people suspected her being a right-wing plant, some deep alt-right plant, or some Nazi collaborator trying to get the left to cooperate with the right wing. I don't think that was her intention at all. Now, the reason why I bring this up, really interesting, because Counterpunch, now, to be clear, when I talk about Counterpunch, I'm talking about the editorial staff of Counterpunch. The Counterpunch has always been very diverse. I read it every day, or I don't read it thoroughly. I skim through it. One of the blogs I skim through every morning. I skim through it every day. So at times they're excellent. There's some writers who are really good. Some of them I'm Facebook friends with. Richard Moser, he's an academic in the Pacific Northwest. I read his stuff. I politically largely align with him. I like his takes. A variety of other people. Miles Honig writes for Counterpunch. Ron Jacobs, a few other people who are really good. Rob Urey, not a Facebook friend, but he's generally really good. A few other people. Patrick Cockburn, brother of the late Alexander Cockburn, he's generally good at Middle Eastern coverage. A variety of other writers. I do read Counterpunch. I do read it. I don't saying it's crap, but what I am critiquing is the editorial policy, and they did have specific policies. So I think in this tax on Caitlin Johnstone, they were covering their butt because they did the same thing, only more so. Okay, so one of the long-time chief editor and leading figure of Counterpunch was a guy named Alexander Cockburn. He was a journalist. Alexander Cockburn lived from 1941 to 2012. He was a good writer. He's Anglo-Irish, I believe. His father was Claude Cockburn, who was a left-wing journalist in the 30s. I think Claude Cockburn, I'm not sure if it's Cockburn or Cockburn. Claude Cockburn played kind of a bad role. He was a Stalinist, and he came out against POUM during the Spanish Civil War. I thought he played a bad role. But anyway, so Alexander Cockburn, he came of age in Britain in the 60s, 70s. He was part of the British New Left at the time. And I believe it was in 1972, he came to the U.S. and next year in 1973, he got a job as editor of the Village Vanguard. The Village Voice. The Village Voice, which came out of Greenwich Village art scene. It was an arts and literature and left-wing politics journal. It was really great to read. It was really cool to read. When it kind of declined, destroyed by neoliberalism, like so many other things, but it was taken over by Rupert Murdoch, and finally it went out of business a couple of years ago. But it was fun to read. I do remember the Vanguard. The Village Voice. I remember the Village Voice. There was the Village Vanguard too, which was something a little different. But I remember the Village Voice. Anyway, it folded like so many other things. But he was editor of it for years. Interesting story. He would interview people, like writers, writing jobs, interview people for jobs there, and he would ask them standard question. He would ask them, "Is your anger pure?" Which is kind of coming from him a little odd. I mean, I hate capitalism with a rage, really fucking rage. I hate capitalism. I hate U.S. imperialism, really. So, but Alexander Cockburn was a privileged, he came from a very well-connected British family. I mean, dude, he came off sounding a little pretentious coming from him. But okay, anyway, he eventually was pushed out. He was fired from the Village Voice for basically being pro-Palestinian. There's some controversy. He accepted, I think, $10,000 from some Arab solidarity organization, I think, to write a book or something. And there were questions of conflict of interest. Basically, he was pushed out for being pro-Palestinian, which was really sad. And interesting, he had an interesting career after that. He was a fairly prolific writer. He wrote a fairly prolific writer. He wrote for Z Magazine for a while. Z Magazine was a project by Michael Albert. They were off on a corner of their own on the left. I used to read Z Magazine. I bought back issues of it, a bunch of from college library near where I used to live. Gave away a bunch of their subscribed to it surprisingly. They gave away a bunch of this really old stuff, and I read it. And it was kind of fascinating to read. Cockburn for a while. I don't know, very early '90s, late '80s, early '90s. He had this wicked trolling liberals. He used to troll liberals, and it was hysterical. One time, article, like feature article, or not feature article, but several big article in Z Magazine, he made fun of Harvard liberals. Like there was this group during the Vietnam War at Harvard, liberal anti-war group called Tucson. It's Tocsin, like a warning bell. Anyway, there's some article written by Tucson, like a veteran alumni of Tucson, and it was really smug, liberal, elitist, kind of meant well, but they were in their own bubble. And Cockburn, he had this wicked sarcasm again, and it was funny. He was trolling liberals. It was hysterical. Guy was a good writer. At the time, I suspected he might be gay or transgendered. I don't think he was, but he had a picture of himself in drag, and people were wondering about him, what's going on. Anyway, he also had a fight with John Judas, who I believe he was at the time editor of, I think it was Mother Jones. And Mother Jones was posing as a leftist. They're not by any means, but I mean, Cockburn called him out, and there's this big fight going on. It was hysterical. It was funny. Guy that was Cockburn at his peak. Anyway, later he left Z. I don't know. He kept getting into fights with people, so I don't know. He left Z Magazine. But Cockburn went to The Nation. He had a long-time column there called Beat the Devil from 1984 until I guess when he died in 2012. It was great. I used to read it. It was great to read. It was fun to read. The Nation, by the way, was founded in 1866, I believe, right after the Civil War, the American Civil War, by former abolitionists. History of it is interesting. A temp job I had once working for a college library. I hated the job. The job sucked, but the job was filing. Anyway, the library had back issues and binders of very old magazines, and they had The Nation there, and I read through it from like 1870s. And I'm surprised to know The Nation was around the 1870s, but I read through it, and it was weird. I mean, interesting, but they had one article on whether women should have the right to vote. Okay, and it was written in like a totally modern writing style. It was eerie, kind of something, archaic, but written in a totally modern writing style. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, The Nation has been kind of liberal left. It's pretty much left wing of the Democratic Party, solidly aligned with the Democratic Party. But for a while in the 90s, early 2000s, it gave an opening to the radical left, and Cockburn was kind of on the radical left. And he had this column, Beat the Devil. It was named after a book which his father wrote. I haven't read it, but a novel his father wrote. Interestingly, a movie was made based on it, starring Humphrey Bogart. I don't know, some interesting connection there. So anyway, Cockburn was there until like Nation started getting from 2004, so moving back to the right, closer to the Democratic Party. I think around 2004, they came out against Nader running. And Cockburn was like the last leftist there. He had a rear guard action against everyone else. It was kind of interesting to read. Okay, so Cockburn, I like him. I miss the guy, but he started getting weird. Very weird towards the end of his last couple of years of life. He started getting weird. He was a climate change denialist. They had a fight with Jeffrey St. Clair, their Counterpunch. He was a big climate change denialist. They call climate change a capitalist. Climate change hysteria is a capitalist plot. He actually said this. Interestingly, he was a big Ron Paul supporter, very enthusiastic Ron Paul supporter. He actually advocated an alliance with the Michigan militia and right-wing militias. Basically said that leftists would support like the Sandinistas or the EZLN, the Zapatistas, whatever. Why don't they support? He said, why don't they support the American version of the same thing, which he thought was in the 90s, the militia movement. So this is going far, far beyond what Counterpunch accused Caitlin Johnstone of doing. This is really a lot further. And okay, and you said a few other really quirky things. He enjoyed being Cockburn enjoyed being a contrarian. He had a fight with the IRS with government with property owned in California. So he started like complaining about big government, and he sounded like a right winger. He was moving to the right. It was weird. I think with him, he was a movementist, and he came of age in the 60s, 70s. Movements kind of collapsed largely. And he was fighting a rearguard action. So he's looking like the populist, like for a while during the Bush administration, the populist far right, many of whom were anti-wars, he thought that's where the energy is. That's where the energy is coming from. This is exactly what Caitlin Johnstone was saying. I don't know if it's a correct analysis, but okay. So um, he, uh, he died in 2012. Administration into the Obama administration. Not clear on how long this went for, but Counterpunch itself gave an opening to right-wing populists. Seriously, there was this guy Paul Craig Roberts, who was Reagan's assistant secretary of state, assistant secretary of the Treasury. Supposedly he radicalized after he left. He he would have articles in Counterpunch pretty often, and he'd quote Lenin, and but then he'd have articles elsewhere where he would complain about immigrants. I mean, Paul Craig wrote Paul claiming that illegal immigrants and on his racist, like, just slightly disguised racist rants. I mean, Paul Craig Roberts is the epitome of red brown, if anyone is. Paul Craig Roberts. And then he had this guy, Mike Whitney, who was an economist. I used to read his stuff. His analysis was interesting. I couldn't really tell politically where he came from, but he was somewhere on the populist right. And Diane Johnstone, who was a good writer, she wrote a book about Hillary Clinton, which I haven't read, but she kind of has said some sympathetic things about the right wing in France. And a variety of some Ron Paul supporters would write for Counterpunch. So they were definitely giving an opening to like the populist right. Well, that ended. I think my take about what was going on is that when Trump got in 2016 or even a bit earlier, that was no longer cool. That was no longer appropriate. For one thing, Trump did seem like he was whipping up encouraging right wing militias. There was what happened Charlottesville, Virginia, right wing fascist rally, and a young woman was killed. So trying to make alliances with the right wing or the populist right no longer looked as it was a bad look, basically a really bad look. And also, the media, the Russiagate narrative, the media was constantly pushing this Russiagate. Somehow, Trump was connected to Russia. So there were all these things going on. I think also Counterpunch wanted to appeal to more of a liberal crowd. So what they did is they had to bury their best. Like people today, seriously, quite a few people today think Counterpunch is red brown. Think Counterpunch even today are Straussites. This is a common feeling. So Counterpunch had to walk away from this really fast, and they used the attacks on Caitlin Johnstone as a way of covering their asses, basically, because they did the same thing. And not everyone at Counterpunch did this, but it was the editorial staff of Counterpunch was going in that direction. Yeah, during the Trump era, Counterpunch had to rapidly re-pivot themselves for a new era to appeal to a slightly different audience. It looked really, really bad, trying to build some alliance with the populist right. And so the attacks on Caitlin were kind of covering their butt. And so they did the exact same thing. Even one of the last articles attacking her, Jeffrey St. Clair, he said that he and Alex Cockburn went to the Ron Paul Institute and talked with people there. We're discussing some type of like left-right alliance. So they did the same thing. And there were also some interesting, really fascinating subtexts, which I'm still trying to wrap my head around, but concerns like Trump. How do you feel about Trump? Is he a fascist? Is he the worst thing ever? I actually think Trump was horrible, but liberals like fixated and obsessed with Trump. Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing. I think Bush was worse, actually. Trump was bad, but George Bush was worse. How do you feel about Trump? How do you feel Russiagate, the narrative? Russia constantly. Syria, the civil war in Syria, like who's the real bad? This was a big part of this. Who's the real bad guy? Is it Assad or is it U.S. imperialism? I think it's U.S. imperialism. It was very much a Nicaragua Contra style operation. Not that I like Assad, but so and then there is permutations of these, and kind of complicated. So they create some interesting fissures among the left, among leftist writers. How do you orient towards? How do you orient the media narrative? How do you orient towards all this? Kind of interesting. And I don't have all the answers. I'm trying to figure this out myself. Okay, so kind of, and finally, okay, there's this outlet called the Unz Reader. Now, they're started by a guy named Ron Unz, who apparently made money in Silicon Valley. He appears to be on the right, but the Unz Reader, they have like a pretty diverse group of writers. They have a fair number of leftist writers. There's some right-wing writers. They have a lot of right-wing writers. Some of the articles are openly anti-Semitic and racist. When are the Jews forcing multiculturalism on us? That's a couple of articles. They quote like thinly veiled racism, but okay, and that's kind of so. Anyway, my point is Jeffrey St. Clair used to write for them. Seriously, his articles are in there. His art, seriously, he no longer does. He stopped in 2017 when the attacks against Caitlin Johnstone started, but they still have his stuff archived there. A number of other leftist writers still write for the Unz Reader, Patrick Coburn, Ted Rail, a variety of other people. And I read the Unz Reader. Some of the stuff is pretty distasteful, the anti-Semitic and racist stuff is disgusting. I think it's pretty disgusting, but some of their stuff is interesting to read. There's a guy, Razib Khan, who's Bangladeshi American genetics blogger. He was the science writer for Discover magazine, I believe. His politics are pretty far right wing, but he was an interesting guy to read. He's highly intelligent. He's an interesting guy to read, mentions these books on history, and he's a fascinating guy to read. I know his politics are pretty bad, but so anyway, I do read the Unz Reader occasionally, though I find some of their stuff to be really disgusting. So what I'm saying is, Jeffrey St. Clair, who was one of the people piled on Caitlin Johnstone, was doing the exact same thing. Seriously, he was doing the exact freaking same thing, which is really interesting. There's a huge measure of hypocrisy. They had this pile on Caitlin to cover up what they were doing. Finally, okay, and this ties in, it was old news, 2017 to 2018, but its ramifications for today. On my previous videos, I talked about YouTube drama, the Young Turks and Aaron Mate and Jimmy Dore. I've been following this. I think it actually is important. This may sound hyperbolic. Okay, I was in two different Trotskyist organizations. I was briefly in the ISO for a few months, then I was in Socialist Alternative for somewhat over 10 years, half very active, half not so active, and I was close to the IG. I'm not in an organization right now. Anyway, a large part of what these groups do, and like a stereotype of Trotskyist organizations, is selling papers, selling their newspapers. I mean, socialist groups in general do this, and I think it's a good thing. I'm not, but the people, stereotype of Trots selling newspapers. Okay. So the theory of it comes from the history of the Bolshevik Party. They were based on Pravda or Izvestia, whatever their paper. The party was based around a paper. Okay, I get that theory does make sense. Most socialist newspapers today are not nearly. I mean, frankly, they're very formulaic. Like if I know, if I follow current events closely and follow what's happening in the news. And I could predict, I'm out of touch now, but I could actually predict if I know the organization, I would predict exactly what they're going to write about. Or if you read a paragraph from some group, I know, hey, that's the IMT, that's the PSL, that's Workers' World, that's the Sparks, that's the IG. I used to be like, that's Socialist Alternative, that's the ISO. I get they're so formulaic, social, and most of them are not that interesting. I mean, okay, anyway. Where it's at, this may sound strange, but where the action is now may sound hyperbolic, but YouTube leftists or leftist YouTubers. Like the Jimmy Dore show is playing the role that Pravda played in the early Bolshevik movement. Now, may sound over the top. Jimmy Dore is not an intellectual. He's not a deep political theorist, but he is building a left, and he's got some flaws. Yeah, he's got some flaws, but he's building a left pole of attraction. And yeah, however, he makes mistakes. He does have flaws. So the thing with the Young Turks, this how his narrative from Caitlin Johnstone is still playing out. The shit-lib consensus is being broken, being smashed. Like U.S. is the main bad guy in Syria. U.S. imperialism is horrible, and so much of the media and some of the left trying to orient towards this is like a shit lib consensus, building consensus. So it's breaking the consensus now. So some of my takes now. I'm not totally bashing Counterpunch. I love if they published an article by me. They probably won't after this video, but I'm just saying, Caitlin Johnstone has made some mistakes. I would strongly disagree with working Mike Sanders, and she's disavowed it. She said, no, I don't, I wish I never said that. Also, so anyway, hope you're not too upset at me here. There's some takes, and hope you enjoy my video. Thank you.